Would I be wrong for dropping a campaign due to one player? So I've been playing D&D for around 15 years, and I've had this same issue once before and it didn't end well. I've recently joined a new group, all level 1 characters, homebrew campaign. The DM and all the players are great and the characters are really cool. Well, except for one. Our DM's one and only ground rule for creating a character was to not make a character who's the suspicious loner type, who doesn't work well with the other characters. Seems one of the players decided he didn't want to listen to that and made a heavily suspicious loner character who refuses to help or be helped. Last game, he basically stole 200 gold that was meant to be shared between the party. He rolled high on his deception and the DM had no choice but to let him keep it all. My character is the only one who rolled a high enough insight to know he was lying. Here's my issue. I've played with someone like this before. Well, a few times, but only once was I sort of forced into doing something about it, and ended up in the same situation. The guy stole gold from the party, and I was the only one who knew. When I confronted him in game, he attacked and killed my character. I was a squishy level 2 warlock and he was a barbarian. It wasn't even a fight, it was a slaughter. The DM told me I could make a new character, but I said no, gathered my things, and left. I like this group I'm playing with, but I don't want to deal with another character like this again. I just wanted to play with cool people and have fun, not have internal in-game conflicts with this shady loner PC. We've had 3 games already and are just starting to get into the story, but now I'm finding myself not wanting to play, because I know the next game I'm going to have to confront the PC about the stolen gold. So now I'm really considering explaining my thoughts to the DM and then leaving. I can't be bothered dealing with this type of player anymore. So, my fellow Redditors, would I be wrong if I left the table? I feel bad, but I'm not even excited to play anymore. This was not the video I was planning on making today. I had a whole other script written about mediocre D&D. So, ahead of time, as I go to dive in and unpack this post that came around my feed about 20 minutes ago, just please excuse me if my thoughts are a little scattered. But what really caught my attention with this problem is the fact that I don't think there's one right answer. One of the difficult things with posts like this is a lot of times we're lacking important context. Like, for example, is this loner suspicious PC, is their player a newer player or experienced? Are they kind of stealing the gold in order to create a story moment? Or is it, just like on the face of it, just a way for them to greedily get more resources? There's a lot of ways that this situation might play out, and really the reason I'm so curious to dive into it is to maybe help you kind of observe the circumstances that you may find yourself in so that you can make an appropriate choice for you and possibly the other players at the table. Hi, I'm John. This is Dragon Mind, where we discover our best selves through gaming. And today, we're asking the question, what would the circumstances have to look like where we're willing to just leave a table? Let's get into it. Alright, so, as I usually do when I read a post like this, the first place I went to was the comments. And the comments had some really good points. First, D&D is a voluntary social game. If for whatever reason you're not enjoying it, it is perfectly acceptable to leave at any time. It would be courteous to let the DM know why, but at the end of the day, if you find that it's more of a draining experience than an energizing one, then yeah, leaving is a perfectly acceptable thing to do. Now, that being said, one of the things OP mentions is that he likes a lot of the other people at the table. And to me, that's the most important quality of a good TTRPG game. It's the real world chemistry of everyone around the table. And I think what they're really sensing is just red flag behavior from a few of the parties involved that have brought up some memories of a bad past experience. That being that a character they were probably excited to play getting prematurely taken away from them through a combination of hostile player actions and allowance by the DM. Which is why, when I was reading that, this player was making deception checks and the DM had no choice, the DM always has a choice. Ultimately, with this situation, the thing to kind of analyze is how all three parties involved share some level of responsibility of resolving this situation in a way that makes sense for everybody. I've said it before, I'll say it again, the DM is the de facto leader of the table. The decisions that they choose to make are ultimately going to create the environment that's going to make the game more or less fun. As a really quick tangent, I specifically remember this one game from the 2014 version of 5e, where the DM explicitly said that we weren't using any optional rules, meaning no multi-classing or feats, and we also weren't using any supplemental content. We were simply creating characters using whatever core content was in the player's handbook. Now, a lot of groups of players would have found this to be overly restrictive, but I was just kind of curious where this would have gone. And to be honest, that game was actually really fun because both character creation and gameplay went a lot faster and a lot smoother. We only played at low levels, but because the DM pretty much knew what was in the player's handbook, they weren't surprised by random spells or abilities from Xanathar's or Tasha's. And there weren't a lot of bonus actions to account for, so pretty much turns flew by. Now, that's not how I would want to play that game all of the time, but as an experiment, it ended up being enjoyable for me. And again, I know for other players, those overly restrictive parameters would have been enough for them to be like, this isn't the game for me. So again, as OP mentioned, the DM explicitly said, please do not create suspicious loner characters. So there is some responsibility on the DM here for not enforcing their own expectation, and thereby also potentially creating some conflict because it feels now like OP had the rug pulled out from under them. Some responsibility definitely falls on this player, and you know what? One of the things we don't know is if this is a new player or a player who's gotten set in their ways, what this player wants out of the game. I mean, yeah, you hear they stole 200 gold from the party. I was definitely in a campaign like that. Everybody got treasure, and then the party ranger had a higher sleight of hand bonus, so they just took something that would have made sense for my character just to sell it. But in that case, the DM stepped in and said, no, please be a cooperative player. And of course, this may be improbable, but there is the possibility that what this player is looking for is using this as an opportunity to get called out for their character, so that now they might have some character growth where it's like, oh, I didn't realize being selfish was bad. In fact, that's probably not what they want, but if the DM presents that to them outside of the game before the next session, that gives them a neat off-ramp to correct their behavior, while also satisfying an interesting story moment that now resolves this whole loner, suspicious type behavior that's proving to be disruptive, at least to OP. And one thing I've learned just as a teacher is sometimes if one student is having trouble with something, other students are probably having trouble, at least in some capacity, with the same thing. So what I mean by that is OP is bothered by this behavior. I would hazard a guess that at least one other player at the table, especially if the DM said outright, please don't bring a character like this, is also displeased with the situation. So yes, totally and perfectly within this player's right to leave the table based on this red flag behavior. And also, the third responsibility is for their own fun, which again, might mean leaving the table, but also they seem to enjoy the other players around the table. Is it worth it for this one player to prevent them from having fun with these other players over a longer campaign? Personally, what I would do is I would first have a conversation with the DM, just more to gather information about what's going on, why they allowed this player to build that character in the first place, who this player is in relation to them, and whether or not it's worth it to allow them to keep behaving that way. And I would probably give it one more session. I tend not to really be the conflict avoidant type though. When this kind of discomfort comes up, I tend to pretty much tackle it head on, which I understand is not how a lot of other people tend to handle things. So again, that's the thing I guess I'm advocating to weigh. Is letting this one player's weird behavior this one time worth not playing with this group of people anymore? Or is it worth it to do a little bit of the conflict resolution in order to be able to potentially keep playing for a while? I've had to answer this question, both yes and no, at various times throughout my TTRPG journey. One time in particular I can remember, the DM was getting really frustrated that there were a couple of players that were being really flaky, and they were maybe showing up to a third of the sessions. So they put the system in place where you'd only get experience if you showed up to the session. After the DM implemented this, those flaky players just stopped showing up. But unfortunately, the effects of the system were kind of left over. So one of the players at the table was a father, and his kid had a recital. What was he gonna do? Not go to his kid's thing just to play D&D and get his experience? But the DM still didn't award experience because those were the expectations. There was one time I had to not come because I had to cover someone at work. And so over time, there ended up being fairly large level discrepancies that directly affected some players' enjoyment of the game more than others. In this case, I talked to the DM, and after hashing it out a bit, they decided to just equalize everybody's levels and then just do simple milestone leveling. I had seriously thought about leaving that table, but by having the conversation rather than avoiding it, I ended up having a lot of fun for the rest of that campaign. Another time, I was in a campaign where the agreement was we were gonna do some pretty heavy role-playing, and it was super cool. You could tell everyone in that player roster very sincerely wanted to role-play their characters. And there was one player that got a little too into it. There were times where we really couldn't tell if they were just method acting or if they were truly upset as a person, and it was starting to spill over to the rest of us. It had gotten to the point where the sincere role-playing stopped being fun and started really becoming seriously uncomfortable. So, as a player, I had a conversation with the DM, who had a conversation with that player, and the next few sessions just kind of felt like walking on eggshells. Ultimately, that was a game I had to bow out of, which was a real shame because leading up to that, I was having a lot of fun, but just the way the group chemistry had altered, it definitely felt much more draining than enjoyable. So ultimately, I made the decision to bow out. And I think that's one of the things that's hard with making this kind of decision. You're constantly evaluating whether or not there's the potential for the game to rebound and become excellent. But also, you don't want to spend so much time that now you feel like you're wasting it. Which is why, ultimately, this is such a personal decision. And I'm not sure if there's a right answer, but I guess if I were asked my advice, knowing what I know about this situation, what I would personally say is, have the conversation with the DM first and see how it goes. If it goes well, give the game at least one more try. There have been times in TTRPG tables like this where I've been not excited to go to the next session because of some sort of conflict resolution that needs to happen. But it ended up resolving in such a good way, and I was able to enjoy the rest of the campaign because of it. So you don't want to dismiss that possibility right away. But if you really get the sense that the dynamic has been irreparably harmed because of this player's behavior, you are totally within your right to drop out of the campaign. So now I want to hear what all of you have to say. If you were in OP's shoes, how would you handle this? Have there been times you've had to drop out of a campaign because of even one player? Or the opposite, have there been times where you've had the conversation and the campaign ends up resolving in a better way? Let me know in the comments down below. In the description are playtest materials for my TTRPG Swiftguard, a 5e adjacent system built off of SRD 5.2.1 that presents a smoother action economy, a more intuitive character creation process, and an alternative spell casting method that I've been told is a little easier to pick up. Let me know your thoughts about the game in the comments of this video or in the Swiftguard community Discord, also linked in the description. Have an awesome day, everybody, and remember, your story matters. Bye-bye now.